Hello, everyone. Happy Friday, TGIF. Thank you so much for joining today's session. This is one within the series that we are doing this summer with our webinars. We know that in the summer, sometimes you get some downtime, and so it's a good opportunity to give a little bit of tweak to your HR policies if you've been neglecting them. And so we're doing a series, as I mentioned, of law updates, how these impact you, and what you need to do about them. And so this topic today is very near and dear to my heart because over the last 11 years during my time with HR for Health, questions around paid time off have always been and continue to be the most confusing things for the practices that I've talked to. So this has always been a trend. It's one of the top questions our HR advising team consistently gets asked from our clients. Again, when I'm out in the field, it's absolutely one of the main questions I get asked when I'm speaking at different events, educating on general HR topics. I think the only other question that might rival the confusion around paid time off is around lunches, breaks, overtime management. And that's actually going to be the next session that we're doing around overtime management. We're going to be tackling that next, and I'll show a QR code at the end for you to be able to register for that. But again, paid time off has always been up there. And that's for a handful of reasons. The most blatant reason, in my opinion, is because there is no one size fits all PTO law. There's no mandate at the federal level, and then every state makes their own rules. And then on top of that, these laws change constantly. So I remember when California was the first to really roll out sick leave in 2015, and there was so much confusion around what was required. And then the laws continue to get amended, sometimes before it even feels like the employers could digest the previous requirements. And so it really does feel confusing because it mixes a lot of elements of HR into one. It mixes legal rules, HR best practices, and also emotions like from the team about what they feel owed to. And it really changes based on where you are. So that's why I think most practices end up really stressed about it, or even worse, just ignoring it and hoping, it will take care of itself. But really, the reality is that paid time off can absolutely be used and should be used as a strategy for your practice, for differentiating yourself from other practices. It helps to offset the burnout that many team members are feeling. But again, at the same time, because laws are continuously changing, you really can't have just a one time where you set up your PTO policy and then never revisit it again. That's really a thing of the past. Because if you do that, or if when you set up these policies, you're not sure really what you're creating, it does lead to potential legal risks, of course, payroll headaches, but also confusion for the team. And you can see like employees expect to get paid time off, but they also expect for you to get it right. And so that's really what we're going to dive into today. So we're going to start with kind of what's changed. Where are we at now? Because we did have some changes this year, and we'll continue to have changes through the second half of the year of some states making their own laws. And so we're going to start there and then really break it down of what are the legal requirements? What do you have to do? And then move into what's the best way to set up these policies. So again, it's you're working smarter, not harder, you're differentiating yourself, and how that leads into employee retention efforts. I'm going to do my very best to leave time for Q&A at the end. I would love to be able to answer your questions live. Please feel free to submit them throughout. I have Jasmine, our director of marketing, on the back end of this webinar, kind of reviewing those. If for whatever reason I'm not able to get to the Q&A, we will absolutely follow up individually with your questions. So again, does not hurt to submit it. Please make sure we know what your questions are. Guarantee you, if you have a question, everybody else on the webinar probably has a similar same question. So it's really great to be able to get that expertise while we're all together. So let's jump into it. Again, really what's changed. So if you were on our Law Updates webinar a couple weeks ago, you would have seen a similar slide to this. And so you can see we have some new states that are rolling out sick leave requirements in 2025. And so what this means is that if you're in these states, you're now going to have additional requirements around not just the time off that you need to offer, but really the nuances around what that time off means, when they're able to request it, what needs to be documented. And this is a trend that we're seeing across the country, because you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, these are the existing states that already had sick leave. And if you're in any of these states, you might even be aware that there's city and local requirements even within it. You know, I'm in San Diego. I think California is rivaling all other states right now where they're amending at the local levels, all different types of nuances. And so it is really getting a little bit more complex. But again, my goal here is to try to break this down so it is really digestible. And this QR code that I'm showing will take you to the mid-year law updates webinar if you weren't able to check that out. I know some of you on this webinar were able to, but if you weren't, you can scan that QR code and it will kind of get you up to speed on all the other things we talked about that we're changing. But let's look at if you have a sick leave requirement in your state. This is kind of generalized speaking of what you need to be aware of that could change within your existing policies. So first and foremost, these requirements extend who you have to offer paid time off, paid sick time to. So it does apply to both part-time and full-time employees. Even if you have temps that are continuously coming back to work in your practice for you, that's really important that they are eligible if they meet certain thresholds. And again, that varies state per state. If you have specific questions on this and throughout on like your specific state, our team is totally happy to help. And then there are some exceptions that exist for small employers, but that's going to again depend on the state. And small employers is really based on employee count. It tends to range between 5 and 15 employees if there are nuances around if you have to offer it. Again, some states say that if you have less than 15 employees, you still have to offer the hours, but you don't have to pay them for the time. But you just have to let them take unpaid hours. Others say you have to pay them. So just be aware of that. And then we have the accrual rates. So this is where the requirements are basically outlining how much time an employee needs to be able to get. So the most common accrual rate that we see is 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. This is really the standard in most states that require paid sick leave. Some states do use 1 hour for every 40 hours worked, but the 1 hour for every 30 hours is common. And so when we're looking at the accrual rate, the laws are saying they have to earn 1 hour for every 30 hours that they work, up to 40 hours a year or up to 48 hours a year. So you have to allow them to accrue until they hit that cap, and then you're allowed to cap it. And then also there's usage caps, meaning most states, if you're having them accrue, so as they work, they gain their hours, then you can actually limit how many hours they can use in a year. So really clean example of this is, let's say you're in a state that has 1 hour for every 30 hours worked with a usage cap of 40 hours per year, meaning an employee needs to be able to take, as they gain those hours, up to 40 hours in the year. But the policy might say that they need to accrue up to 80 hours per year. And that's to essentially hold like a bank for them as they go into the next year. And again, I'm going to dive into the accruals a little bit more in a bit, but you are able to and should have both an accrual cap, which is how many hours just in total they're able to accrue, but then a subset of those hours, you can kind of limit how many they're allowed to use within a year. You also can institute, and you should have minimum increments for how many hours are taken, meaning and there's also requirements around this. So if somebody needs to use their sick hours, the laws are stating that you can't require them to use a full day worth of sick if they just need to use, let's say, 4 hours of sick for an appointment or something like that. So typically that minimum increment is about 2 hours, where let's say again, if they need to take an hour of sick leave, you can say, well, actually, I need you to take 2 hours. But you can't go crazy and say, if they need to use any sick time at all during the day, they have to use it for the entire day. So just be careful about that. Also understanding what employees can generally use their sick leave hours for. So again, generally speaking, this does include like personal illness. Of course, that's probably the most common that you would think of, injuries or preventative care. So going to the doctor, going to the dentist, I hope they go to you if you're the dentist, but if you're an optometry practice, it's going to the dentist, those sort of appointments, mental health days. But then it also does expand into caring for a sick family member, and some nuances around that. Then we do have states that include like domestic violence leave in this, public health emergencies, if there's school closures for their kids due to emergencies, that they need to be able to take those hours for that time. Couple like call outs I also want to make here that we do see clients before they become clients of ours try to do, which is kind of coming up with like some workarounds or just some wacky ideas, I like to call them, to try to avoid tracking and offering paid sick time. So what I've seen, probably the most common, is paying out all of the hours that an employee should be eligible to earn for sick leave in that first paycheck of the year. And I know the logic there is, well, I'm still paying them for those hours, and maybe they wouldn't have even used all those hours, so it's actually a benefit to them. So I'm just going to pay it on that first paycheck, make it clean. I don't have to worry about tracking it. But that's absolutely a pitfall. Do not do that. The laws specifically state that you cannot do that. They need to be able to accrue those hours, use them when they need. You can't just pay it out in that paycheck. Additional requirements around this, you have to have a written policy. That is, again, stated in these laws of the employees need to clearly understand how your policy is structured, how it works. So your employee handbook is becoming more important than ever before. And it's always important, but this is now, there's no law that says you have to have an employee handbook, but there are laws that say you have to have these policies in writing. And then typically sick leave requirements also come with an additional document or two that you have to provide employees to sign. And these are separate documents from the handbook. And if you're an HR for Health client, which I know we have a lot of clients on this webinar, which I love to see, don't stress about that. Your new hire checklist would have already been updated with these documents, or will be updated when your laws come into place. So you're automatically covered with those things. But if you're not an HR Health client, make a note. If you don't have these documents, make sure you track those down so that you're up to speed there. And then you absolutely have to document the available time. So employees need visibility to how many hours they have available, what they've taken, what they have remaining. This needs to be on their wage statements, like their pay stub, or you can provide it to them on like a separate paper that maybe you're manually doing every payroll. Again, if you're an HR for Health client, those requirements for visibility and documentation are right in HR for Health, so you don't have to stress about that too much. And then employees are really the ones kind of controlling that time they're taking. So if you're not sure how many hours they want to take for sick leave, ask them what they're planning on, taking in terms of those increments. And then unused time is typically not paid out in final pay. We'll get into that a little bit more in a bit too. And then records need to be retained for 3 to 4 years. So this is a lot just for sick leave coming into play. So let's jump into what this means for you. What are you legally required to do? And I think a great way to start is to kind of break down these buckets of your options so that we're all like on the same kind of starting point for the rest of the content. So the definition of PTO is essentially any paid time away from work. So it doesn't matter why they're out of the office. You don't care. They have those hours. And another way to look at this is vacation and sick leave are essentially lumped together into that PTO policy. Again, there's no really like these hours versus these hours. It's just you have this full bank, you can use it for what you need. Then we have vacation, which these hours are really paid time off meant for rest and for relaxation. So these are typically planned hours. You can have a lot more requirements around how employees are requesting this type of time off. And then you have a separate sick leave bank, which is that paid time off for if they're sick, if they have checkups, if they're caring for family members. So again, setting the stage, you either have a PTO policy, which is vacation and sick leave combined, or you have sick leave and vacation, which are two separate policies and gives you a little bit more flexibility of what you want to do within those policies. So there is no federal requirement, meaning all of our states, we don't have a requirement at the federal level about offering paid time off. So that's the good news. That includes vacation, PTO, and sick leave. There's no requirement at the federal level that says you have to do any of those. But then your state might have a requirement for paid sick leave. And so that's where it gets complex because it's understanding, well, there's some flexibility I have if hours are taken for reasons other than sick leave. But if sick leave needs to be taken, all those requirements we just listed out of the tracking and the documentation and the flexibility for the employee all has to be followed. So if you're offering a PTO policy, it's super important to make sure that your PTO policy is also following the requirements of the paid sick leave laws, because again, those hours are essentially assumed within that policy unless you have a separate sick leave policy. So again, that means that all employees have to receive that minimum amount of hours required by law. And then part-time employees need to be eligible for PTO, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we're going to dive into this a little bit more in a bit, but that's really important to kind of set the stage. And then when it comes to vacation and PTO, some states do consider these hours earned wages, meaning use it or lose it policies might not be kosher. And again, we're going to dive into that, but sick leave is different because most states don't require payout of sick leave. As I mentioned in the previous slide, if your state does require you to offer sick leave, you don't have to pay that out. But whatever your structure is, clear policies and tracking are super important for compliance. So even if you're in a state that doesn't have sick leave and there's no federal law, as we know, that dictates what you offer your employees, if you're offering paid time off, whether that's sick, vacation, or PTO, you need to have that in writing and track it accurately to make sure that you're in compliance. So your policies need to be in writing, and then you need to make sure that what's in writing reflects what you're actually offering to your team. And again, the good thing is that we set this up for you. Actually, our processes, if you're a client and haven't gone through this yet, we're going to set up your time off tracking based on exactly what's written in your handbook policy that we've written, so that it's exactly the same of what's in writing and it's exactly the same of what's set up. And what we have found actually is that clients will come back to us and say, well, actually, it's wrong the way it's set up in the system. And we say, well, this is what your policy says. And then we might find out, oh, well, I actually have these nuances. I negotiated this for this employee that actually gave them more time off. And so it's no problem. We'll go ahead and fix it. But again, we definitely want to make sure what you have in writing is what is set up and tracking. So let's jump into the meat of it, because these are really the decisions that you need to make, whether you have these existing policies, you're impacted by these changes, or again, you just haven't revisited this in a long time. Now is the time to do it. So first decision that you're going to make is, are you going to do PTO or are you going to do separate vacation and sick leave policies? So a reminder, PTO is just any time away from work for whatever reason. And then vacation and sick are two separate banks. Vacation is meant for just planned time off, rest, relaxation, whatever they might want to do. Sick leave is for if they're sick, have to care for a family member, have a doctor's appointment, etc. So we actually used to recommend PTO policies for a long time because really, if somebody's out of the office, why do we care? They're out of the office, we're going to pay them for it. We're just going to lump everything together. But since so many states have started to roll out their sick leave requirements, we've changed this approach a little bit. Because by lumping all of your sick and vacation hours into one PTO policy, the hours have to be considered sick leave hours when relevant, but also vacation hours when relevant. And so that can make it a little sticky because I'm always having to kind of err on the side of caution. And so could give you a little bit more flexibility in how you handle requests for being out of the office if they're separate. But again, we'll dive into this to help make the best decision for you. So after you decide if it's PTO, vacation, sick, then you're going to have to decide who is eligible for what. So again, if you have a sick leave requirement, all employees must be eligible. But when we're looking at vacation, you do have some flexibility here. So you can offer different types of policies to different buckets of employees, meaning that typically is part-time versus full-time. So you can offer different structures for all of your part-time employees versus your full-time. And defining what it means to be part-time versus full-time is actually completely up to you and what's normal for your office. There's no law that says this has to be part-time or full-time for this conversation. Of course, other benefits like health insurance and that sort of stuff does have some requirements. But when we're looking at vacation, it's really up to you. How many hours is your office open during the week? If it's 40 hours, part-time will likely look different than if you're open 32 hours. So you get to define this and then kind of put those buckets in place for the different types of employees. Next, you're going to decide if you're going to offer paid time off based on the employee's anniversary date or based on the calendar year. So we recommend anniversary date, but we do find that a lot of practices that don't have systems in place, like before they work with us, they default to calendar year because it feels a little bit easier. In my opinion, it is only easier for everybody who's there on January 1st. But then new hires thereafter can get really confusing. It's like, how much do I prorate? It's confusing for the employee to understand what they're eligible for. So we do recommend anniversary date. And again, our system's just going to run that for you. So you don't have to track where everybody's at individually. It's just going to kind of run on its own for you. Then you have to decide how much time is given to each of these buckets. So is part-time eligible for vacation? If so, how much do they get? When will they get it and how will they get it? And we'll dive into this in just a moment a little bit more. And there is so much effort that goes into deciding everything I just mentioned that sometimes how an employee should request time off and defining that to give those expectations to the employees can get overlooked. So this should be spelled out in your policy. Who did the request go to? Is this going to be on paper if you're not in HR for Health? Or, once you do your handbook through HR for Health, the wording's automatically going to be in there for you to direct the employees to put it through HR for Health. But just make sure you're defining, regardless of what system you're on, how they're expected to communicate the time off to you. And then lastly, what happens to unused paid time off? And this is really important because if you don't specify it in your policies, you might be obligated to pay hours without realizing it. So that's kind of our basis, but let's dive into really what are your options when making some of these decisions. So first, you get to decide on all these different policy types. So lump sum. This is where you give an employee a set amount of PTO all at once, usually at the start of the year or their anniversary date, depending on what structure you've decided on from the previous slide of how you're going to track it. And this is the way I would think about this is think of it, you're handing them the whole cake, not just a slice at a time. They're getting it all. And employees really like this because they can plan ahead. They know exactly how much time they have for the whole year. It's also pretty easy to oversee because there's no need to calculate accruals month by month. Offices also do use this as a performance incentive. So congratulations on your first year. Here's your PTO for the next one. The downsides of this, though, is employees might use it all early and then they can quit, which leaves you with that cost. And if you don't have a payback policy, and most states actually don't let you do this, then you have like that financial risk. The other thing is if an employee uses all those hours for vacation, if you have a combined PTO policy, if they use it all for vacation, then they might not have time for sick days unless you had those in separate categories. So they go on a big vacation, later in the year they get sick, it kind of puts you in a bind. So just things to consider. Next is front loaded. So this is a version of lump sum where employees get all their time off up front, but this is even if they're brand new. So this can be really good for recruiting and retention since new hires don't have to wait to earn their days. They get it right away. This also is helpful for practices that might want to, you want to appear generous and competitive in the tight labor market we're in. Those are some pros of it. But similar to lump sum risks, a new hire in theory could take all their paid time off right away and quit. So if you want to do this structure to protect yourself, we recommend considering a waiting period, so like 90 days before front loading that PTO, or build in proration for the first year employees. This can be a little bit complex if you don't have a system to calculate that prorated amount, though. Again, we'll do it for you, so no stress, but that's another option. And then the other thing to keep in mind is in some states, front-loaded vacation time is considered earned wages immediately, so it might be required to pay out at separation, which we'll dive into those requirements in just a moment. Then we have prorating. This is where employees earn paid time off gradually over time. So it's usually based on numbers of hours worked, but it can be based on different formulas like per pay period, per month. You can get creative with it. Again, assuming that you're satisfying the sick leave requirements that we talked about earlier. This structure does feel a little bit more fair, I think, on both sides because employees earn time off as they contribute to the practice, really, aka as they work. It prevents people from taking too much time off too soon. It also encourages longer-term employment since these balances are built up over time as they're investing into the practice. It also can be tied to part-time versus full-time hours really easily because it's just based on the hours that they work. So if a part-time person's only working 20 hours and full-time is working 40 hours, it's just at the rate that they work that they get those hours. So it's not like they both get all their hours up front and a part-time person could take like 2 months off right away. Again, it accrues as they work. However, it does require a little bit more administrative tracking if you're not an HR for Health client. So just keeping that in mind, I think that's why some people stray away from it. But again, if you're a client, it's going to automatically be built in. Another thing to be aware of is if like new employees do have emergencies before they've accrued that time, it could lead to negative PTO balances or unpaid time off. So just something to consider. Next, we'll look at use it or lose it practices. So this is basically if an employee doesn't use their paid time off by a set deadline, so usually the end of the calendar year or anniversary year, they forfeit the unused time. And this can actually help prevent PTO hoarding, where employees just like amass all these hours of time off over these years and then try to take it all at once. It also encourages regular time off to help reduce burnout because they know that they're going to lose it at the end of the year, so they might as well take it throughout. And it's a little bit easier on your budget because you're not just paying out this big thing down the road. But it's not legal in every state. Of course, there's a caveat. So if it is legal in your state, it does run the risk of creating a mad rush at the end of the year because everyone wants to use their days before they lose it. And we all know that end of the year is also the busiest time in your practice. So again, just something to consider. And then we have to look at carryover because this is a part of it. And that's where employees can roll over unused paid time off into the next year. And typically this is with limits. You can allow it fully, but you can also put a cap, like you can roll over 1.5 times the amount of hours that you've accrued into the next year. So this does help provide some flexibility for employees because they can save up for big trips or unexpected life events. It reduces the end of the year panic to use up those hours and can show you have that work-life balance, and that can help with recruiting. So again, there are some things to watch out for here. If there's no cap defined on how much rolls over, employees could just hoard a ton of PTO again and then take really long leaves later on, which can create some financial liabilities for you if you owe a big PTO payout. So then let's dive into some more of the nuances that can help make these decisions. So if your state requires sick leave, or you are offering sick leave out of the goodness of your heart, use it or lose it policies are generally allowed. So there are some caveats. If your state requires sick leave and you set up your sick leave policy to be on an accrual basis, meaning they earn their hours as they work, the unused hours typically have to roll over to the next year. If you front load the hours, use it or lose it is generally allowed. So the logic behind this is to allow employees to have hours available going into their next benefit year. But either way, you don't have to pay out sick leave at termination. So you just have to make that decision. Am I going to front load all those hours for them if they use it or lose it, but then the next year they get all those hours right at the beginning again? Or am I going to do accrual and then allow the unused hours to roll over and then they accrue back to that cap? Some strategies we have seen our doctors use is paying out sick leave at the end of the year, kind of as a perk. So just something to consider. And then if we look at vacation and PTO, it's a little less black and white when it comes to use it or lose it. So vacation and PTO are often considered earned wages. So if your policy says employees earn vacation or PTO, many states do require you to pay out unused balances if somebody leaves the practices. Then there are states that don't give you a choice on use it or lose it, regardless of what your policy says. You could write whatever in there and it still requires you to pay out. So like California, of course, Colorado, Louisiana, Maine, actually as of 2023, you have to pay out those hours. They're considered earned wages. Then you have states like Illinois, New York, Massachusetts, and their laws generally state that vacation or PTO hours should be paid out unless it clearly states otherwise. Then there are even more states that specify if hours are accrued, aka earned, then it has to be paid out. But if it's given up front, it doesn't need to be paid out. So this is why it's so important to work with our team that understands these state-specific laws when drafting these policies to make sure you're not leaving out any of these decisions. Because again, even if you're thinking, well, use it or lose it is allowed in my state, you might not be aware that if your policy says nothing about it, you have to default to paying them out. Then we have advance notice requirements, and this should really be taken into consideration if you have a sick leave requirement in your state and you're on the fence between doing PTO or sick leave. So if you have a sick leave requirement, you cannot initially ask for advance notice, meaning like a doctor's note. You can't tell them you have to tell me a week in advance if you need to take sick days. It limits your, I'm going to say, power around what the employee has to do to be able to take those hours. So if you're using your PTO policy to cover your sick leave requirements, just keep in mind you do have a little less control over how many hours they can take without questioning it or rejecting it. On the other hand, vacation policies absolutely allow you to require advance notice. You should require advance notice, meaning if you're going to take vacation, I need to know a week or a month in advance. And you get to set what that advance notice looks like. So some of our clients even get as nuanced as if you're going to be out for more than a week, you have to request it 3 months in advance. If it's 2 to 3 days, I don't need more than a month notice. So you can really get creative in what makes sense for your practice there. So I did just want to show this. HR for Health, again, I know we have so many clients on this call, and if you're not utilizing this feature, I really want to make sure you have this awareness that the system is super flexible for how you want to set up these policies. So you can decide down to a literal date of when you want them to start accruing their hours. You can specify, do I want accrual to be per hour, per day, per week, per month, per year, per pay period? We see a lot of different structures that come to us. And so the system is really adaptable depending on all of these decisions that we just outlined. So again, if you're not utilizing this feature, please call our team. We would love to get this set up for you to make sure that it matches your handbook. Again, the system can even automatically roll over hours to the next year if you want, or you can set it up where it notifies you so you can look through the hours and roll them over yourself. So a lot of flexibility there. Some kind of final considerations as we're looking at the decisions that you need to make is that written policy being visible to employees. So in that policy, the things you want to consider is what happens if multiple people request the same time off? We get this question all the time. And the answer is it's really up to you. It's how the culture of your practice runs. Some of our practices decide to get really granular on departments. So for example, like hygiene departments, only one person can be off from hygiene at a time. Other people do it where it's first come, first serve. Just whoever requests it off gets the time off first. Other people do it based on tenure. So if you're there longer, you kind of have that, you have more clout to be able to request time off and get that default to you over people who haven't been there as long. So it's completely up to you of how you want to do it. You just don't want to overlook this piece. You absolutely want to have this in writing and make these decisions so that it's objective, it doesn't get emotional. And then you also need to make sure you have the system to back it up. So again, in HR for Health, it's going to show you that timestamp, date and timestamp of when somebody requested time off. So if you're doing it based on first come, first serve, you want to hold up your end of the bargain of what's written in your policy and actually make it based on first come, first serve and have that visibility for who did it first. Also consider, do you want to require use of paid time before taking unpaid time? This can be a slippery slope because they can hoard their hours, like we were talking about in the previous slide. We do recommend requiring them to have paid time off, to use paid time off available before they take unpaid time. But again, this comes down to the culture of your practice and what makes sense for you to function. Just make sure it's the same, it's handled the same for everybody. It's in writing of how you want that handled, and then you're doing it the same. You're not saying, well, Susie, I'll let you take unpaid time off, but Judy, you have to take paid time off before unpaid time. So just keep it consistent. Again, we talked about how far in advance time must be requested. That should be written out. Mandatory use of time is another thing to consider. Do you have office closures where maybe in the summer you're closed and you're requiring your employees to use their time off during that time? That's okay. You just need that in writing. And also on the flip side, if you're super busy at the end of the year, like I know so many of our practices are, and you want to limit the amount of time that can be taken off, you can dictate that as well, but it just needs to be really clear. And then again, how should time be requested? Spelling out for them. It's not enough just to say, here's the whole policy. Literally, how do you want them to ask you that they want to take time off? Is that on paper? Is that in a system? All things to consider and then have written in that policy. So let's jump into some, I guess, more strategy behind this. Like as you're making these decisions, really paid time off is not just about compliance. That's a huge part of it and super important, but it's also about keeping good employees. And so some ways that you can approach this is first and foremost tiered PTO systems. When I say PTO, I don't necessarily literally mean PTO, I mean paid time off. So vacation, sick, or PTO. Having those tiered systems is allowing an employee to move into larger tiers of hours that they're eligible for based on how long they've been with the practice. So maybe it's 1 to 2 years, they get 1 week of vacation, or 1 to 5 years, they get 1 week of vacation. 5 to 10 years, they get 2. 10 to 15, they get 4 weeks. Like you can have that to incentivize and kind of reward that longevity. That is definitely common. It also helps to reduce turnover. If people know that they have something to work towards, it really does help. And on the flip side, flat PTO, meaning here's your hours, I never am going to increase this. It's a little bit easier to manage, but then it doesn't have that encouragement for employees to want to stay with the practice. So again, on HR for Health, you can have that. We'll set up the tiers for now and in the future. So as employees work based on their anniversary date or calendar year, if you decide to stick with calendar year, it's just going to put them into those different tiers as they are with the practice for longer. So you don't have to worry about managing that. Also considering adding like extra days, so like mental health days or volunteer time. Internally at HR for Health, you get your birthday off, it's little things like that that can really help your practice stand out in hiring. Again, still having those requirements around when they have to request it, how far in advance they need to ask you for it, if a shift, they need to cover the shift or help get coverage for their shift. Again, no, you can't really require that for sick leave if you have a sick leave requirement. You can't say you have to find somebody to cover your shift if you want to take a sick day. But for all other types, like you can put those parameters in place, and that really helps to like reinforce the behavior that you want to see. Other tactics our clients have started to take is, I know that being late, not clocking in and out correctly, not showing up without advance notice, all these things are really big headaches for our clients to manage. And again, the system does help with that, but what we are seeing is some of our clients putting like rewards around punctuality or performance related to PTO. So it's like, okay, if within this quarter, you don't go outside of the lines I've put in place of tardiness, no shows, all of that, I'm going to reward you with an extra PTO day. And again, it doesn't like break the bank too much for you, but it helps to have some skin in the game for the employee on what is eligible for them. And then really important, considering the employee experience to understand your policies. So I think where there's absolutely a disconnect, like if you're confused about your paid time off policies, they are definitely confused about your paid time off policies. So it's not enough to just say we offer paid time off or you can earn up to 2 weeks per year or 4 weeks per year. It has to be really clear to them in these policies about how they get those days and how you're going to track it. And then once you have that really clear, probably even more importantly, you need to make sure you're doing what you're saying you're going to do. So back to that example of where when we have clients that have one thing in writing and another thing on the system, we need to true that up. What you say you're going to do in your policy should be exactly reflected in the system of what they're eligible for and actually how it works. If you're saying they get 2 hours per pay period, the system should be reflecting that they get 2 hours per pay period. And I don't want you to just look at this from the lens of compliance. Of course, that's really important, but just again, from the employee experience, like employees that are coming into your offices now are typically a younger generation, very used to software and technology and things being at their fingertips. Like as consumers and out in their world, they're on TikTok. It's super easy on Amazon to see where's my package. I know down to the minute it's going to get delivered. But if they come into work and PTO is being tracked on a spreadsheet that they don't see how many hours that they have available whenever they want to see that, or you're saying, hey, print out this piece of paper and fill out for me when you want to take time off. Like it's no longer like acceptable for the employees you're trying to recruit. This is like table stakes for them of what they expect going into the practices that they're working for. So just keep that in mind of having those clear policies and making sure that you're doing what you're saying you're going to do, but that it's really easy for an employee to understand how many hours they have available. That helps decrease confusion. It also helps you to be a little bit stronger around the time off that employees are taking because everyone's looking at the same thing. There's no like confusion around what's expected. And we're seeing that practices that are offering flexible, well-structured paid time off policies are seen as more modern, that they care about their team more, and that fair and transparent policy aspect really does help build that trust between the employer and employee relationship. So it's not enough to just say you're going to do it. You want to actually make good on your word, because it's also going to help reduce like resentment, favoritism claims, like last minute conflicts. Like when you have this structured really well, everyone kind of knows what's expected, and it's really easy to identify if somebody's going outside your desired policy, procedure, all of that. And really, we're seeing teams that feel supported with time off are more likely to stay with your practice. They're more likely to accept your job offer, more likely to have contribute to a healthy collaborative culture. They come back feeling more refreshed when they have time off. And let's face it, not offering paid time off doesn't stop employees from taking time off. So at least in this way, you can put expectations around it of exactly what they're supposed to do. So now what? Thrown a lot at you guys, but let's prioritize some of your next steps. First and foremost, reviewing your current paid time off policies. So if you're in any of those states that I showed on that very first slide of having sick leave, absolutely reviewing your current paid time off policies is your first step to identify the next step, which is, are the current structures that you're offering optimal for you? Are they working? Are you finding that employees are still no call, no showing? You don't have coverage where you need it. It feels really chaotic. Like you feel like maybe you're being taken advantage of. Those are all indications that maybe your current structure isn't optimal. And so you can take these learnings of kind of rethinking about, okay, now that I understand the foundations of each of the decisions I have to make, how can I create a policy that's best for not just the employees, but also for the practice, so that it's a win-win on both sides. Absolutely confirming then that your time tracking system matches your policy. So what you have in writing is how you're tracking it. And ideally, it is visible to the employee. It's a non-negotiable now. Making sure you don't have one thing in writing and doing another thing. And then last, looking at kind of a health check around utilizing HR for health. Again, we looked kind of behind the curtain on who was going to be on the webinar and saw so many current clients. So I wanted to make sure I touched on this. And if you're not a current client, you get a little look behind the curtain on what, to also check in your systems, I guess. So first and foremost, is your handbook set to auto update? So remember, in the employee handbook generator process that we have, a perk of that is that we're automatically updating your policies as laws change so that you're staying up to date, but it is a preference. So either if you have the preference turned on to auto update, the policy itself always is going to auto update, but is it going to auto send out to your team versus we will alert you, you review it, and then send it out to the team? So just checking those settings, making sure, again, we're pushing out updates all the time. So have you checked to make sure if you don't have it set to like auto send to the team, have you checked those updates so that you can review them? And it will actually show you what a policy was before and what it is after, like when we make those changes. So it's going to like redline it for you essentially, so you can easily identify what's different. Next, are your paid time off policies set up for tracking? You might have your handbook done, but haven't talked with our team. We do the heavy lifting. We set up the policies for you. So those are probably already in HR for Health, but what we need your time for is to tell us what the existing balances are so everything's accurate for the team. So is that done? And then are you leveraging the employee scheduling feature to stay on top of conflicts? Meaning the employee scheduling feature is a new feature we rolled out last year, which brings that scheduling feature into one place for you, but also it's pulling from the time off as people are requesting time off into the schedule. So you can easily see if somebody is scheduled at the time you've already like approved for them to take time off. So really great way to see everything in one place. You can see in a month view, week view, everyone who has time off and how that's impacting your schedule to make sure you have all the gaps filled there. And just re-reviewing, are you utilizing that date time stamped visibility of who requested time off for first in your practice? And are you making sure, that's set up so those PTO payouts are handled correctly in payroll? And This QR code is here because, as I mentioned, our next series builds on this one, as did the last one we did, which is how does all of this impact overtime as people are working, the time off they take, and overtime, how's that impact payroll? We know overtime is such a headache for all of our clients, and so we're going to dive really deep into some strategies around why it's happening and how to fix it. So even if you're not a client, you're totally welcome to take advantage of this webinar so you can learn about some best practices around that. So again, if you scan that QR code, that will take you to be able to register. So as we wrap up, I want to thank all of you for uh, being here again. If we do have a couple minutes, Jasmine, I'm not sure what questions look like in terms of coming in, if it makes more sense for us to answer those on the side, if they're like really specific to different clients, but this is our information. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. We are happy to help. We know that this is confusing, but hope that this was a little helpful to at least get a starting point of what your next steps are.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jill. That was incredibly informative. Really great to be able to hear you speak to this. We do have two questions in the chat, so
Cool.
I'll read those off for you. And if you think they might be more relevant for us to connect with HRS, then that's totally fine.
Awesome.
So here's the first one. It's, can an employer require employees to take vacation during periods when the office will be closed or during the employer's vacation time?
Yes, absolutely you can. Just need to have that in writing. It should be a part of, there's, again, if you're a client, there will automatically be in your handbook that we give you a policy about mandated office closures and use of vacation time. So just check that. If you're not a client, you don't have that policy, you should email us at hello@hrfelt.com. But yes, absolutely, that is within your jurisdiction. It's really just sick leave that has a little bit more nuances where you can't force that.
Okay, and specifically for sick leave this time. So in Wisconsin, can we require employees to take PTO if they call in sick? They only use PTO.
Yes, you can. Again, want to stipulate that. That goes into also use of like unpaid hours if they have paid hours available. So I would double check your policy that you have those requirements. Again, it's within typically your PTO policy. There's different sections that outline all the steps that I just did of the decisions you have to make. And there should be a policy in there of if they need to take paid time before taking unpaid time.
Nice. And then we just got another one in. When we had PTO policy and offered the 5 California sick days, why did we have to keep max at 80 and pay them out even if they took 5 days?
Say it again for me.
Yeah, when we had PTO policy and offered the 5 California sick days, why
Mm-hmm.
did we have to keep the max at 80 and pay them out even if they took 5 days?
So I would need to look at your specific policy to know like how it was written. I would say this is probably a good one for follow up. The way you're describing it sounds like there might be some double dipping around like accrual versus use it or lose it, like lump sum versus accrual and the use it or lose it stuff. So it again kind of just depends how it's written and if it's a PTO policy or a separate sick leave policy. So we'll check on that for you to make and get back to you individually so we can make sure that's super clear.
Awesome. And that is the last one in the chat. Yeah, if no one else wants to drop any questions in, that is what we've got for today.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for being here. Like I mentioned, hope I see you guys on our overtime management webinar. Give us feedback. What topics do you want us to be talking about? What questions do you have? And we'll follow up with you individually for those individual questions, but look forward to seeing everybody soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jill. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks.